And now time has come to call on our third trainer for the day. Her name is Carrie Fisher, also known as Monika Cichmińska, the one behind the other wonderful course, Checkpoint. And I'm really looking forward to hear what you have to say on distinguishing facts from opinion. And we'll see how, you know, the submarine reading and slowing hers down will now translate to skill number 3. Over to you, madam.
Okay, hello. So I thought you would ask me whether I was going to give you any top secret information from the Star Wars trilogy. You know, the set, but not really. Okay. Hello. It's very difficult to see you. In fact, it's impossible. But before I go on to talk about my skill, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and I will try to see you wave at me if the answer is yes, okay? So the question is this. If you see a headline and an image like this, would you feel interested to keep reading? Hands up or wave or nod your heads? Okay, I can see barely anything, all right? All right, would you be a little bit worried, afraid, a little? Okay. Would you be interested enough to keep reading this text? Would you? Hands up, okay. Okay, would you be interested enough, curious enough, to check the source? So would you go to NASA website, for example, to find out whether there really is an asteroid? Not always. Okay, and the final question is, oh, maybe you are one of those people who would not go to NASA website because you know they are not going to tell you the truth anyway, and you just don't believe in all these things you find there because it's all one big conspiracy. You can wave at me now, but I suppose you won't. Oh wait, look, there are some people here. Okay, good. So, if you had bothered, well, actually this news story appeared on the internet in 2015 and it went viral. And a lot of people were worried, and there was quite a little bit of panic in the United States because it was supposed to hit the south of the United States and Mexico, and quite a lot of people went to buy their, you know, safety, survival kits, and so on and so on and so on. But if they were people like you, they would have gone to the, to NASA website, and they would have checked. This is fake news. There is no asteroid that is going to hit. About climate change, you know, it's quite a big topic nowadays, and people talk about it. So he goes to the internet, and because he's one of those kids who prefer to find everything on YouTube, would your kids be similar? Your students or kids, I suppose, they would. So he would go to YouTube and he would try to find something about climate change. And what will he find there? I found an interesting piece of research conducted by a German scientist at university in Germany, in Aachen. And what he did was he collected a random sample, and he did this 1 or 1.5 years ago. So anyway, he collected a random sample of 200 YouTube videos, which were all related to climate change. And he checked what they contained. And it turned out that over 50%, that is 107, either denied that climate change was caused by humans or claimed it was a conspiracy. Which means that my son, if he's lucky, he will find, you know, a video, right, a clip, which presents the real information, the truth, scientific facts. But chances are he's also likely to find one of those videos. And I think that this is a crucial skill, and it's not just a reading skill that we are responsible for teaching. It's not just teaching, you know, to go for meaning, but also to be able to distinguish between different things that are presented in different texts, whether they are facts or whether they are opinions. Especially that technology may soon be not on our side. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That some, I don't know if you've heard the story or seen the story, but scientists at Washington University were able to produce a fake speech by Barack Obama. And a lot of people were taken in. Because it turns out that if you have enough recorded material of a person, and there is artificial intelligence kind of software, which imitates the movement of your mouth when you speak. And so you can actually make Barack Obama say whatever you want him to say. Like, yes, I am in love with Hillary Clinton. So just imagine how likely we will be to believe politicians in the future if we know that this kind of technology may become sort of practically usable or used. So what I'm trying to say, and now I'm going to start talking about my skill, is that as adults and as parents and as teachers, we have this huge responsibility of teaching our children and teaching our students of how to read texts to decide what is a fact, what is an opinion, what is a distorted fact or a misunderstood fact, and what in fact may be fake news. And I don't know if you are familiar with PISA student assessment. I'm sure some of you are, because these tests are also carried out among Polish students. They carry them out every 3 years among 15-year-olds to check literacy in 3 different areas: in reading, in science, and in mathematics. And as you all know, Polish students turned out to be pretty good at that, especially reading skills, in 2012 to 2015. They were in the first 15 or the first 13 countries, number 9 and 12 in those different tests. The results for 2018 have not been issued yet. Anyway, what these people do before they actually come up with a new test, for example, to check literacy in reading, they also do a lot of analysis, and they published a report in which they say what exactly is the ability to read nowadays. And if you dare to look, I would like to underline 2 words: understand and reflect. And I think that is what our students have a problem with, as Marta said before me: reflection. And as I was saying, reading is very important as life skill, and I think especially nowadays, because every single day we are flooded with new and new and new information items. And I don't think my son and a lot of other teenagers are actually likely to check every single time whether what they read is true. However, we can help them with at least one thing. We can help them distinguish facts from opinions, which I think is a good beginning to develop the skill of distinguishing facts from fake news, for example, or false information. And there are 3 steps to do it. I think it's a teachable skill, something that can be taught and practiced like every skill, but it takes time. It's a process. I'm so happy that Marta was here first, and she sort of said so many things which I can now quote. So I think the first thing that you need to start doing with your students is to encourage them to keep a data bank. Okay, so when you do the first activity of this kind with your students, when they need to distinguish facts from opinions, you will probably see something like this if you're using Marta's course book. And of course, the students need to decide whether these words or expressions refer to a fact or an opinion. And of course, you need to discuss with the students the first time you do it, what makes a fact, that it's something based on data, research, statistics, questionnaires, and so on and so on. And opinions, in fact, may be of 2 kinds. I don't know if you agree with me, because it may be something like the author's opinion, I guess, I believe, in my opinion, to my mind, but it may also be something which I hate in my students, and my students love it. Everybody knows. It's common knowledge. As we all know. And I say, okay, but who is we all, okay? And I don't know about your students, but my students seem to love these phrases, especially in writing, when they write their for and against, or essays of opinion, or when they, prepare for any exams and they have to justify their, and everybody knows that this and this. And I say, well, it's not a scientific fact, it's still an opinion, isn't it? So the students need to know which phrases and which words or phrases point to a fact or an opinion, and of course then they can go and look for those phrases and words and phrases in a given text to work with that. But when I say keeping a data bank, what I mean is that the students keep a real data bank in their notebooks, somewhere at the end of a notebook. I believe in handwritten notes, as both the speakers before me said. I think it's very good practice. And because what I want my students to do is when they go to another text, which is in the course book, even if it doesn't have this particular instruction or this particular activity, you may still ask your students, okay, do you remember the last time we did fact and opinion kind of activity? Okay, go into the text and see whether you will be able to find any phrases or any words which will point either in the direction of a fact or an opinion. And of course, the students will find, working in pairs or groups, they will find probably, according to one study, but then there usually is a smart student in your group, or you can just help them with an additional question, who will notice that there are also some grammatical structures which will point you whether something is a fact or an opinion. Because might, obviously, is maybe baby, isn't it? And then you can ask, okay, what else is the maybe? And say may or could, fantastic. And what grammatical structure goes with facts? And say, oh yeah, present simple. Because it goes with, you know, scientific facts like ice melts and so on and so on. It's exactly. So see, it's not just words, phrases, but also certain grammatical structures. And later on, of course, they will develop, hopefully, their own like data bank of words, phrases, and grammatical structures. Does that make sense? And they can still keep adding, yes? Because, you know, later on, as they become more advanced, they will have it is likely, okay? Or in all likelihood, and so on and so on. So all those phrases, the language will become a little bit more advanced or complex. Number 2, dig deep. Marta will like it, yes? So digging deep. And digging deep means your students need to realize that once they do their distinguishing facts from opinions kind of activity, of course, they need to be careful about the words, the phrases, and the grammar, but they also have to be made aware of the fact that very often the information which is given in the task itself, that is here, is not going to be the same kind of wording and the same kind of grammatical structure which they will find in the original text. Because sometimes my students, when they do an activity, as Marta was saying at the beginning, they think, well, I did very well. And then it turns out that they don't even have 50%. And sometimes the students tell me, I didn't find this information in the text. And they often say it when they are too lazy to find that there is a lot of paraphrase in those texts. And you know, the more advanced level they are going to have, the more advanced the paraphrase will be. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is a question from an activity, and this is where the information related to the sentence can be found. What I do with my students to practice paraphrasing text is I actually ask them to write again, to visualize, okay, that almost every item of information can be given in a slightly different form, using different words, different structures, okay? And once, if you do it once, twice, 3 times, chances are that the students will be a little bit more aware of the fact that, first of all, they need to find the place in the original text where the relevant information is hidden, because hardly ever will it be given in the same way as in that question, okay? Sometimes it happens, okay, that the situation, sometimes it happens that the information in the exam sentence comes from quite a long part of a text, stretch of a text. I think Karolina is going to talk about summarizing. And this is a bit like this, in fact, that a sentence in which the students need to decide whether it is true. And there are 2 things which you can do easily. One thing is to, every time you work with it, maybe not every time, but as often as you can, when you work with any text, whether it's a text from a course book, exam task type text, sort of reading text, just any text, you can always ask your students to find one example of a fact as expressed in the text and one example of an opinion. Okay, because it's not so difficult to do. You just, the students, once they are trained and once they have their data bank, it should be quite easy. And the second thing I do with the students, and I like doing it, is to work with authentic texts. I know that there is not much time for this in the classroom, but whether I work with teenagers or with university students, I ask my students once in a while, sometimes it's once in 2 weeks, sometimes a little more often, to choose a text which is interesting for them, not very long. And then I ask them to do different things with it. It could be content-wise, something like write what you learned in the text. It could be language-wise, sort of, like write 3 words, right? Write down 3 words which you found in the text and you didn't know. But it could also be connected with reading skills. And this is a text which a student of mine found, okay, a student who was 18. And the website which I use, as you can see, is Science News for Students. It's not quite difficult. It is quite simple in terms of language and texts, as you will see for yourselves if you're curious enough to check. And anyway, this was a text about whether violent games make people violent or not. That's quite an interesting subject for some teenagers. I don't know why, really. And this is an example of a text, and what the student found was that as many as 80% of US teens play computer games. That was given as a fact, because there are some statistics, some results of some service questionnaires. And then playing violent games have lasting effects on the brain. That was given as an example of an opinion, because the author wrote, gave this particular piece of information using the modal verb might, which I think is good enough, because this is drawing the student's attention to different micro sort of reading skills. You could add something else. You can write a summary of the last paragraph. You can do anything, and I think it's good practice, and my students love it because they can choose their own texts and what they read. And finally, one thing which I love doing is having students writing exam type questions for other students. And when I say that, a lot of students and a lot of teachers say, oh, this is your job. Your students shouldn't do that, you're lazy. And I've got 2 arguments to sort of counter-strike, or to strike back again, yes? So one argument is that if you are supposed to write questions about a text, you have to read it carefully, yes? So let's say that you divide your students in pairs, and every pair needs to prepare 5 sentences which contain either facts or opinions based on the text. What will they have to do? They will have to do a lot of reading first, and discussion in pairs. Even if they do not understand something, they will have to talk to each other and discuss it with each other. Secondly, if you write questions, exam questions for any text, you really go into the kind of exam mindset, sort of. And I suppose all of you, all of my colleagues who write exam questions know what I'm talking about. Once you need to write exam task questions, you really know, you begin to realize, you get some insight into what the examiners, Centralna Komisja Egzaminacyjna in this case, really want from you. Okay, there's no better way. You don't have to do it often. You can try and do it. It works for me. It works for my students. And of course, distinguishing facts from opinions is also a part of listening activities and listening comprehension part of the exam, Matura exam, where it's going to be. Of course, it's a little bit more difficult because you need to listen. You can't read twice. You can't read 3 times. But basically, the procedure is the same, okay? The students work with the data bank they have, and one way of the way I deal with this problem and my students complaining about, the text being spoken too fast and so on, is to look at the tape script. And again, in the tape script, to have a look and add any phrases or any words or any grammatical structures to our data bank, because it's going to get longer and longer. But it is going to get limited at some point, yes? The list will not be unfinished. Okay, and to sum up, I would like to sort of do a summary, a decent summary of what I've just said, that I think it is important to encourage your students to keep your fact, opinion, language data bank. Does that sound like a good idea? Of course it does. That's how I learned all those, first of all, second of all, and so on and so on. I had my own data bank when I was a student. And you need to make the students justify their choices. They need to be aware what makes a fact and what makes an opinion. Everybody knows is not a fact, it's an opinion. And it's common knowledge, it's not a fact, it's an opinion. And we all know, again. And I think it's important to draw your students' attention to paraphrase as well, which I think is inevitable in this kind of task. And I would suggest that giving your students a small fact opinion task as often as possible is a good idea, because it's all a matter of training a certain skill. You can't do it in a year, all right? So if you use a little bit of authentic materials to keep your students happy, at least once a while, maybe once a month, to give them a homework assignment in which they read what they choose for themselves, but you need to start now. It's a process. It's going to take 3 years, 4 years, maybe 5 years, right? Step by step. And it's a skill which is teachable, but it's also a skill which is important and useful. And it's not just my opinion. In some places in the world, for example, in Great Britain, as you can see, this is the 15th of July, 2019, news item, that schools are in different parts of the world, for example, in Great Britain, are considering introduction of parts, at least some courses, or as parts of their general sort of reading syllabus, something like distinguishing facts from false information, facts from fake news, because they realize that this is a huge problem for our students and for our children. And I think teaching them to distinguish facts from opinions is something we can start with. Okay? And not only is it important and useful, but first of all, it's teachable as long as you start it now. Thank you very much.